TrekProfiles Podcast, episode 46, recorded November 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we speak with a Star Trek fan, and we try to figure out why we all love this show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 46. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us via email at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning! As we recorded this episode, we were in the middle of Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery, so all previous Trek content, up to and including that point, may be discussed during this episode. That is your spoiler warning, humans. As always, my trusty sidekick and co-host is the swimmingly serious, steadfastly succinct, yet stringently sententious M5 Multitronic Unit. Are you there, M5?
M5 awaits instructions.
M5, let's do the news.
News and updates displayed.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is an independent show. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. As is becoming typical on this show, there are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of the episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. Let's talk about the Kobayashi Maru Lightning Round. I'm running a contest until January 15th, and I am inviting you, the show listeners, to submit your very own questions to be used on a future episode. I've got some rules and suggestions and lists of some prior questions, so you can get the flavor of what we're looking for here. I got all that posted on my website, so you'll definitely want to check that out before submitting anything. Every accepted entry into the contest gets you a chance to win a grab bag of cool Star Trek merch. Who doesn't love Star Trek merch? I've posted some pics on Twitter of just a few of the items. There's actually a lot more that I haven't shared yet. It is all good stuff, I guarantee it. And if I use your question on the show with a guest, you will get a credit in the show notes page up at trekprofiles.com, and you'll get a shout out at the end of the episode. And this is the very first episode where I've got some listener-submitted questions. So at the end of the episode, when we do the Kobayashi Maru Lightning Round, you'll get to hear it, and we will also do our shout-out to the first successful submitter at the end. Who will it be? Goodness gracious. Anyway, on the topic of the Kobayashi Maru, let's do the feedback from episode 46 with meteorologist Katie Nicolau. After each episode drops, I tweet out that episode's questions as Twitter polls, and here are the results. Who's chasing you, the Borg or the Dominion? Katie said it was definitely the Dominion that was chasing her, but the Borg assimilated the Twitter poll 54 to 46%. Which is worse, San Francisco as seen in the early scenes of Star Trek IV or the heavily polluted Tegra 4? Katie picked Tegra 4, and so did the Twitter poll respondents by 67 to 33%. Would you rather suffer through a Ponfar or a temporary bout of the crazy space water infection from the Naked Time? My guest and all of you agreed it would be the Naked Time Crazy Water by 58 to 42%. Which ship would you like to see on a peaceful visit? A Klingon D7 or a classic Romulan TOS Bird of Prey? Katie and the audience were once again in agreement that the D7 was the right choice by 66 to 37%. And finally, which place would you rather visit for science? Ruropente's icy vistas or the sandy wastes of Ceti Alpha 5 after the orbital shift? Katie said Ruropente, but the Twitter poll came in at an astonishing 50-50 tie. In response to that, the only thing I can say is, this is Ceti Alpha 5? Sorry. Okay. Let's move on and do a little bit of listener feedback. In the episode I did with Noah Averbach-Katz, we had talked a bit about how when the show Enterprise was an original broadcast, they really hyped up and heavily promoted the episode The Andorian Incident around the idea that we had not seen Andorians since TOS. Prior guest and friend of the pod, Justin Ozer, contacted me via Twitter to let us know that there were, in fact, a few other minor appearances of real Andorians in TOS, but they also had a part in the animated series. Commander Thalen appeared as first officer of the Enterprise in the episode Yesteryear. Very cool. We had totally forgotten about that. So thanks for reminding me about that, Justin. And by the way, Justin is a great follow on Twitter. You can find him at TrekFan4747, where, as he says, he tweets about nothing but Star Trek. And that's it for news and weather. Let's move on. M5, let's start the show.
M5 will comply.
His favorite character is Odo, and his favorite ship is the refit Enterprise 1701, and he just finished rewatching Voyager Season 6. But he loves Shran and those wily Andorians. He's from Pennsylvania, North America, Earth, in Sector 001. It's Thad Hait. Welcome, Thad, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be here. This is one of my favorite shows.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that so much. I'm always amazed, frankly, that anyone even listens to these at all. So it's always nice when someone says something like that. So, but I have to tell you that the M5 demands that I ask question one, which is that, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yes, very much so.
Do you have a recollection of how Star Trek came into your life?
I do. I was 7 years old, and my older sister turned on Star Trek The Next Generation one evening, and I think I wanted to watch something else and was a little whiny about it, but I sat down and watched it. I don't remember what the episode was. Mm-hmm. All I remember is that Worf was mad about something, which is 80%
every
of the episodes. So I'm really not sure what episode it is, but I quickly started watching it all the time. At the time, our local Fox affiliate was showing TOS every weeknight at 6 and TNG every weeknight at 7, and every night that I could, I was watching both.
So this was not TNG original broadcast. This was after.
No, it would have been during TNG's original run, but this would have been syndicated earlier episodes. I would have started watching Star Trek during the final season of TNG. But okay. I don't know that I ever watched any of those episodes when they first aired. I think I only was watching them at 7 o'clock on the syndicated ones. I mean, technically they were all syndicated, but you know what I mean. And around that same time, I started watching DS9. The same channel had it on Saturday afternoons. That would have been first run. I don't remember for sure what my first DS9 episode was either, or my first TOS episode. But I got really into all three, and then when Voyager came along, I watched it from start to finish.
So you mentioned that your sister was the one who turned you onto it. Does she still watch Star Trek?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she is still a fan. I would say that my fandom has eclipsed hers, but she is still definitely a Star Trek fan. She enjoys Star Trek.
Okay, so at some point she didn't look at you and say, look what I did.
Oh, no. I unleashed the monster all the time.
Okay.
But, I mean, she enjoys watching Star Trek. We still talk about Star Trek, but, when I get interested in something, I go, full bore into it. And obsessions come and go for me, but Star Trek is one of the few that never went, and my entire life I have always been super into Star Trek, and that is unlikely ever to change.
Oh, right. So you are pre-committed. You're in it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so as we sit here in 2020, there's been, I guess, approaching 800 hours or so of canonical Star Trek. Have you seen it all?
I have seen it all. I dare say I have even seen it all more than once.
All right, fantastic. And that includes all the new shows, old shows, animated series, everything. Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. So you're watching the new shows as they come out. Are you now you're on the East Coast, so
yeah.
Are you staying up at night?
I stay up until 2:15 in the morning to watch the episodes when they drop.
Oh, goodness gracious. And are you normally a night owl, or is that unusual for you?
I am normally a night person. I'm usually going to bed around 2, so I'm staying up a little later. But
okay. So it's not that much of a stretch for you.
No. I usually go to bed somewhere between 12 and 2, so it's not... I don't have to stay up too much later, and the idea of going to bed when there's new Star Trek that close, that doesn't happen.
Well, for me, I'm the early bird, not the night owl. So I'm going to bed at 8:30. I'm thinking, it's about time to go to bed. Have a little dram of whiskey, and time to head upstairs. And so I am not staying up until midnight.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
That's nothing at all.
Yeah, I can't do it. But I will gladly get up in the morning and watch it. I mean, I have to go take the dog for a walk and do all that stuff, but I'll watch it depending on my work schedule. But I will definitely consume it that next morning and stay off the social medias unless something really wild is happening. But yeah, so it's always a struggle. It's always a struggle. But you know what? It's very consistent with how Trek has been ever since TOS ended, right? When TOS was originally on, we all had to watch it at the same time. But now it's like everyone's consuming it at all different times around the world. It's just part of the gig, right?
Yeah, and the fact that you can just consume it whenever you want after it's out, too, is just amazing. Like, there were episodes of the broadcast era Star Trek that I didn't see for years because I didn't see them when they first aired.
I remember that weird feeling I would get every night as a kid. And I'm talking, a little kid watching Star Trek that like I never knew what episode was on. And like I'm just watching the TV waiting for it to start. And I'm like, is it going to be one? Is it going to be a good one? Is it going to be a good one? Is it going to be a good one? Oh, it's that one. It's a good one because they're all good ones. So
I know that feeling very well.
So you've watched all the episodes. A little bit of a logistical question. How do you prefer to consume your Star Trek? Are you watching it on your phone on a big screen, or are you watching plastic discs, or are you streaming it all? What do you do?
I almost never watch it on my phone. I can say that just straight off the bat. I do not understand people who want to consume long-form media on a tiny little phone screen. If you happen to be like on an airplane or something and that's the only thing you got, sure. But otherwise, there are better screens more suited to that purpose in my house. But that's personally, I mean, if you want to do it on the phone, go for it. But for me, there are usually a couple ways. My primary method, and certainly how I watch new episodes when they first air, I have a theater room that I set up in my house. It's not like a professionally done one or anything, but I have a projector and a 100-inch screen and surround sound, and that's where I will watch the new episodes when they come out. Or if I'm sitting down to like seriously watch something, I'll do it there. In that case, I do use the plastic discs, Blu-ray or DVD, because they are better quality than the streams. Both for standard definition and HD, the streams are much more compressed than the physical media. Mm-hmm. But I will watch Star Trek like on my iPad or on my computer while I'm doing something else sometimes too. Or something I do like to do with the newer Star Trek, which is filmed in that cinematic aspect ratio. At my computer, I have an ultra-wide monitor, so I do sometimes like to watch it on that because it fills the screen.
But don't you find that it's not, given the fact that it's streamed and compressed, I mean, don't you see some artifacts and some other weirdness when you look at it like that?
I do see some, yeah.
That would take me out of it.
Because
it doesn't bother you too much?
It's a 1080p stream, so you see some, but it's not terrible. And it's no worse than what I see on my 100-inch projector screen.
Oh, that's true. Very fair. All right, very good. So
I will say, for a 1080p stream, CBS All Access does a pretty high bitrate stream on that. They don't look terrible for 1080p. They could look better, but they don't look terrible.
But it'll never look like the Blu-ray does. Yeah,
and that's actually a sticking point for me. I mean, you probably would want to cut this out of the podcast because it's not interesting to anyone except except AV nerds. But on CBS All Access, they're in HDR now. But regular Blu-ray doesn't support HDR. 4K Blu-ray does, but regular Blu-ray doesn't. And the show's not in 4K, so they don't make a 4K Blu-ray. So depending on what you want out of the video stream, you could say CBS All Access is better. It has more accurate color than the Blu-rays, for instance. But the actual overall picture quality is better on the Blu-rays.
I see. Okay, so that's like the finer points, right? If you're really into that stuff, like for me, I'm just trying to figure out what the story is. I just want to like get into it. So I have absolutely watched it on my phone. I've watched it on a tablet. I've watched it wherever, and on a big TV. I'm kind of an all of the above kind of guy. But I get it. That's how you choose to watch. I think it's great. So let me ask you a question that. Do you really have a stand-up Chakotay sitting in your bathroom with a word bubble admonishing people to wash their hands?
I do. And you are very lucky to have started recording this today because if you had asked this question any day before today, I would have said no. What the heck are you talking about? But yes, I do.
And why do you have? So obviously I want to ask you about collecting things, but I have to ask, what compelled you to first of all get a bunch of stand-up Star Trek figures, cardboard cutouts, and what possessed you to put them in your bathroom?
Okay, all right. So a friend of mine found an eBay listing of every stand-up cardboard standee from that was available to be purchased for Star Trek in 1996. It was like a bulk list of all of them because this person had won them at a convention and they'd been in storage for the past 25 years. And so this was basically the entire casts of TOS, TNG, DS9, and Voyager. And she was reaching out to people because obviously this was a very expensive auction, because you can imagine. But she was reaching out to people like, hey, do people want to go in on this and get a whole bunch of cardboard standees? So she got some people to put money down ahead of time. I actually wasn't one of those people. But then once she ordered them, she's like, well, we still have all these standees and I don't have room for all of these, and I'd like to get some of my money back. So she started asking, like, anybody want to buy some cardboard standees? So, the one I actually bought is Jean-Luc Picard, who is now hanging out in my living room.
Oh, yes, I see that. Yep. So for the folks who are listening, he's showing me that on the camera, so that's great. And
then I also said, like, that I would be willing to take others if, that was the one I wanted to buy, but, like, I would be also willing to take others if no one else wanted certain ones, etc.
You're a gentleman and a scholar, Thad, I can tell. Very gracious of you.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? Free Star Trek stuff. Who doesn't want that? But, so, and by that point, she had already made her money back, like, completely, just through selling them to other people. So she asked me if I wanted Chakotay and Dr. Soren from Generations.
Nice.
I said, sure. And I have to say, I remembered that I put Picard in my living room. I had forgotten that I had put Dr. Soren in my dining room behind the bar. And when I went down the stairs this morning, like, he scared the out of me.
Well, you know, an El-Urian in your dining room is just not what one expects in the morning. I mean, you know, you're coming down to get your coffee, you know, you're thinking about, well, here's what I got to do today. And all of a sudden, time is the fire in which we burn, you know, sitting right there in the dining room. It's very shocking.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm like, where am I going to put these? So I'm like, all right. So I'm thinking about it. And I actually have a friend who keeps a mannequin in his bathroom that he occasionally changes the clothes in just as a conversation piece. It's like, okay. So I'm thinking, all right, I have a free corner in this bathroom. I'll just stick Chakotay there. And then the Chakotay stand-up is sort of stern. He's got his arms crossed and he's got a very serious expression on his face. So I'm thinking,
yeah, it's
right,
a dour Chakotay.
Kind of looks like he's judging people. So I'm like, oh, I know what I need to do with this. So I did. I printed off. I made up I found a speech bubble on the internet, typed in the words, big text in it that's like, you know, be sure to wash your hands or I'll need to inform the captain. So and I feel like by putting that speech bubble, it makes Chakotay in the bathroom become less creepy and more humorous. So I'm...
Well, I need to play the tape out here, Thad, because what I want to understand is, like, if there are visitors over to your house, do you feel like now you're going to be like, hey, do you need to use the restroom? Would you like to use the restroom? You know, I have a restroom. If you feel you need it, you should use it. You should use that one right there. In fact, if you want to go right now, you can, and I'll wait. I'll just wait here, and you can go in there and use it.
That said, you know, this being 2020, by the time I actually have people in my house that would use the restroom, I might have forgotten the novelty might have worn off, and I might have completely forgotten that everyone doesn't have a Chakotay in their bathroom.
So let's bring it back a little bit. Besides the giant cardboard Judgy Chakotay in your bathroom, do you have other things that you collect that are Star Trek related, Thad Hait?
Many things. If it's Star Trek, I want it. Is basically, like I very expensive things I usually won't buy unless I really want them. But in general, there are a few Star Trek things that I see and like, I don't need that. I might not always buy it, but I rarely think I don't want it. I would say one of my big collections is these the plastic Playmates action figures from the 90s. Mm-hmm. I don't have a complete set, but I have many of them. And anytime I'm at a con, I always go through, especially when they have the vendors that have the bins of loose ones. I'm always like digging through there for ones I don't have, because these were the ones I played with when I was a kid, so they have that sort of special feeling to me. And I also feel like because they're shiny plastic and toy-like, they actually kind of look more like the people that they're supposed to be than the fancy ones that, cost $50 and are supposed to be perfectly accurate and are really uncanny valley.
Right. Now, it looks like, so you're not a person who keeps them in the box.
Oh, no, I don't keep anything in the box.
Even like if you found a pristine one in the box, you're going to take it home and take it out of the box.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Hey.
I know there are nerds screaming at hearing this, but no. Toys are made to be played with. You should take them out of the box, and you should have fun with them. Toys sitting in their box do not bring me any joy. Being able to take them out of the box, pose them, play with them, have them do funky things. Like this Riker, I frequently have him standing on my desk with his foot up, that sort of thing. You can't do that when he's in the box.
Nope, you can't do that at all. And we all need special standing Riker, on our desks. Like, yeah, I think that's great. So you've got the action figures collections. What are the other things that you're really proud of in your collection? What sparks joy to Marie Kondo? What sparks joy in your collection?
Okay, well, anyone who follows me on social media knows that I have a bit of a thing about Starfleet uniforms.
Bit of a thing.
It was in a convention group on Facebook recently that someone asked, how many Starfleet uniforms do you have? And I did a quick mental tally, and I think the answer is 26. I have quite a few. They definitely do give me joy. I just, wearing a Starfleet uniform, I feel like I'm part of Star Trek or part of Starfleet. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. It's one of the best things. One of the coolest things about going to a con is you can walk around in a Starfleet uniform and no one thinks you're weird.
Nope.
So no, I have a couple just sitting here near me right now because this is my computer where I do Zoom conferences and things. So I also, like to dress up for those. So I have a lot of different Starfleet uniforms, including one that I have actually made. I put together a Monster Maroon for STLV last year. It's not a perfect screen accurate one or anything, but it looks better than the cheap knockoffs that I could find, which was why I did it.
And if I remember correctly, Thad, you sewed that yourself.
Yes, I started with a base using a knockoff from some vendor in China that wasn't really accurate, and I basically took everything off down until it was just a red jacket and made a lot of modifications to it. So I didn't start from scratch, but I did a lot of sewing to get it to where it is.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Very good. So you love the costumes, the action figures. What is the single most prized thing in your Star Trek collection, if we haven't talked about it already?
That's actually a bit of a tough one.
That's what we do here, Thad. We ask the tough questions on Trek Profiles.
I mean, I don't have too many things that are like super rare or anything like that. Like,
it doesn't have to be rare. I'm just saying for you, what's the item that is most special to you?
So,
stand-up Chakotay?
This is what? No, it is not stand-up Chakotay. This is technically not a Star Trek thing. Well, it is, but it isn't. I have a cat that I named after a Star Trek character, after L'Rell, the Klingon Chancellor from Star Trek Discovery.
Hashtag Chancellor Cat.
Indeed. And back in February, before the world ended, I went to Farpoint convention here in this area, just south of me in Baltimore. And Mary Chieffo, the actress who plays Thorell, was at the convention. And I took an 8x10 that I had printed out of Laurel, my cat, and had her autograph it. She signed it, addressing like a message to Laurel and everything, and she was very excited, and it was awesome. And that's probably one of my most prized Star Trek possessions, actually.
That's glorious. That's glorious. No, I think that's fantastic. I don't see there's any I don't believe in any interpretation where that is not Star Trek. That is completely part of your Star Trek collection. So you made reference going to the Farpoint convention. What was the first sci-fi convention that you went to, whether exclusively Star Trek or not?
Depends on your definition of sci-fi convention. I have, for several years, like we're going back like 10, 15 years, I have, not every year, but frequently gone to Baltimore Comic-Con for a day just to walk around and see the booths and stuff. That's not really a just a sci-fi convention, but they do have some sci-fi things. Actually, my very first cosplay was there. It was before I started doing things in the Star Trek, doing a lot of stuff in the Star Trek fandom. I was actually dressing up as the Fifth Doctor from Doctor Who for that.
Okay.
My first sci-fi convention, and again, we're talking technically here, was tiny. I mean, it was a convention, it was just really tiny and was only like 4 hours long. There's a bookstore here in Harrisburg that the local Starfleet fan chapter does a sci-fi day at, where they just they get a couple guests, and they have some people, they have some cosplayers, but it's not big or anything. Like I said, it's only a couple hours long. It's not even like, it's technically a convention, but it's not. I think some people would probably say, well, it doesn't even count as a convention. But anyway, that was my first experience with that. I happened to go to that in 2016 when the 50th anniversary of Star Trek was big.
Yeah.
That was what got me like back into the fandom, kind of. I have always been a Star Trek fan. I've always loved Star Trek. When I was a kid, I was like obsessed with Star Trek, and I have always continued to watch Star Trek and frequently rewatch Star Trek, etc. But I never really did much other than that until the last few years. I happened to see a thing on Facebook about that, so I went to that sci-fi day. I thought it was pretty cool.
So you weren't even a member of the club. You just saw a thing on Facebook.
No, and I'm actually still not a member of the club, but that's something we don't need to get into. And J.G. Hertzler was there, the actor who plays Martok on DS9, so that was cool. He's actually the very first actor I got a autograph with. From.
Oh, nice.
Mark Okrand, the guy who invented the Klingon language, was there, and Michael Jan Friedman, who is he's written a lot of books, right? But he's written quite a few Star Trek novels, including the very first Star Trek novel I read as a kid. So that was exciting.
And which one was that?
That would be Reunion, which is a TNG novel.
Okay, great. And
I had fun there. I also they had a bunch of these Playmates action figures there for like $3 a piece, still in the package. This is when I found out that they are actually not worth anything these days, which is amazing for people who want to buy them, not for the people who've held on to them for 30 years. But I got really excited about that. I bought some of them there, and then went online, went home, and like bought like 50 more online.
Showing a lot of restraint, I see.
Oh, yes, very much so. Restraint is not one of my strong suits.
It's okay.
And so I really enjoyed that. So that sort of like got me like thinking about Star Trek again. So I got those, and then I'm not sure where I first heard about it, but back in would have been probably January or February. I'm not sure when it launched. Early 2017.
Mm-hmm.
The Deep Space Nine documentary launched their Indiegogo campaign to crowdfund it.
Yes. I was a supporter. My name's in the credits.
So is mine.
All right.
I don't know where I first heard about it. It was probably on a Facebook group or on Reddit or something like that, because I was like sort of lurked in some of those groups, but I wasn't super involved. And but anyway, I saw that and I thought, oh, this looks cool. I'll back that. So I signed up to back it. And then a couple weeks later, they added another level that was, if you wanted to, so I ended up backing it twice, because their other level was, it included tickets to Star Trek Las Vegas that year. And a meet and greet with cast and crew of the documentary and DS9. And I'm like, well, that sounds really, really awesome. I had just gotten my tax refund. It was that time of year. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this. So, I think of STLV as my first real convention experience. I saw, little bit glimmers before, but that was, I hadn't done any other major sci-fi conventions before that, and I just dove headfirst, was there for all 5 days, and it was amazing.
And did you come by yourself? Did you know anybody?
I was by myself. I did not know anyone. And I talked to 5 people the whole week. Because of that same DS9 documentary, I had started listening to some Star Trek podcasts. They were interviewed on what was the official Star Trek podcast at the time, Jordan Hoffman's Engage. And I started listening to some back episodes of that. And through that, he had interviewed the people on Women at Warp, the Roddenberry podcast.
Yes, very good.
And I found them through that. And then I started looking for other Star Trek podcasts, because I was still in that bug. And from there, I found Trek Geeks.
Mm-hmm.
And they had an episode with Jim Morehouse on it. So from him, I found Trek Ranks. And then from that, I found 2 weeks before I went to STLV, I found Shore Leave, which was convenient. Because they told me all about I listened to their Shore Leave 101s, which I believe you were on.
I was on the very first one. So for those who don't know, what that is referring to is Shore Leave is a podcast put out by our friends over at the Tricorder Transmissions. And it's actually a podcast about the convention going experience. And they did a STLV 101 series, and they asked me to be on it because I live in Vegas where STLV is, and they just had a bunch of questions like, if you want to go to the grocery store, where would you go? Where's a cheaper way to do this? What hotels are nearby? They wanted a local perspective, so they invited me on, and I was thrilled to be on. And that's actually the day that they asked me if I wanted to do a podcast for the network, and I said no, which is a story I've told elsewhere. So very good. So yes. I guess we didn't scare you off, and you decided to go anyway.
No, and it did help me out. I did take some advice from that. My first year at STV, I did things that I later realized were not necessarily the best idea, but I didn't know at the time. I was looking for a cheap hotel to stay that bundled with my airline ticket. I actually flew through Spirit Airlines, so I was really going cheap.
Oh dear.
So Spirit had a bundle where I stayed at Palace Station, which I would never recommend that anyone ever stay at.
Oh my goodness. Okay. It has since been completely renovated, if that matters at all. But yeah, I would not have recommended that. But okay,
it can't be worse than it was in 2017. I mean, it was fine. I just needed a bed. But it was not exactly a great place. It was also nowhere near the convention. So I rented a car as well, which it wasn't anywhere. You couldn't walk to the convention from there, but it was very easy to drive to the convention from there. Just a couple turns and you're there, basically. So,
I want to say one thing right there, Thad, which is I remembered you making a post on Twitter saying that I don't think I've ever actually been in the city of Las Vegas. Because for those who don't know, the city of Las Vegas is not what people think it is. As a political entity, it's
is Palace Station actually in Vegas itself?
It's across the street, the other side of the street. That's Sahara.
I still probably haven't been in Vegas then. I've been
so
close.
if you walked across the street, you would have been in the city of Las Vegas. But you were right on the cusp, man. You were on the border of the wormhole, like looking in, and the prophets were calling to you, and you did not take the leap. You could have done it.
I have been to Vegas then because I went to the Walgreens in the shopping center across the street. So I have been to Vegas.
Then you have been. See that? Okay. I can't believe I just remembered that, but I remembered you tweeting that once, and so you just told me.
I do remember tweeting that,
I was like, you were right across the street.
Yeah. So anyway,
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. So yeah, I drove to the con every day, which wasn't that bad, especially because I didn't know people, so I wasn't hanging out post or pre-con with people. Mm-hmm. So it was fun, and it was convenient to have my car parked like right outside the convention center, because like anytime I pick something up in the vendor's room, I could just run out to my car, which was convenient. But I have not done that since. Since then, I've stayed across. I've still been wanting to be cheap, but a little more convenient, and I stay across the street at the Gold Coast now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't drive. I just fly in, and get a lift to the. But yeah,
totally makes sense.
That was a great experience. I didn't meet very many people.
And what year was this?
A handful. 2017.
2017. Okay.
I like briefly said hello to Bill and Dan from Trek Geeks and told them I liked their podcast, and that was it. I did accidentally meet Heather Barker Behrens from Shore Leave. Because I sat down next to her on the shuttle bus to Gaze in Space, and she recognized me from the unofficial Facebook group. So that was exciting.
I think I was there at Gaze in Space that year. Was that the one it was at a club that was on the west side of town, and they had shuttle buses?
It was at a club. I don't know where. I couldn't.
Yeah, I think I was at that one that year. Yeah, that was a really good time.
It was. I had fun there. And I met a handful of other people that I talked to about Star Trek, but for the most part, it was mostly just experiencing the panels and everything else. And it was amazing. But then because of that, like, I still listen to different podcasts, and people kept talking about, and you can follow us on Twitter at this. I'm like, okay, so I had a Twitter account. I've had a Twitter account since like 2007 or something, back when Twitter was something no one knew what it was. But I didn't use it much. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to start following some Star Trek people on Twitter. And that's where my Star Trek fandom just exploded.
That's when the Sarlacc, the tentacle comes out, grabs you by the leg, and sucks you in, right? Sorry to mix my fandoms there, but it is what it is.
But because I went to SCOV and had such a great time, I'm like, okay, I want to do more of these. So a couple months later, I think it was September, because it was the weekend after Discovery premiered. So it would have been the end of September, I think. Creation, the company that ran STLV, had a smaller Star Trek convention in New Jersey, in Parsippany.
Cherry Hill? Oh, Parsippany. Okay.
Yeah, apparently it bounced back and forth between Cherry Hill and Parsippany, because just picking the two metro areas. But that year it was in Parsippany. So I drove out to that. Again, I didn't know many people. I met a couple people there briefly. That's where I first met Marina Kravchuk, and a couple other people, but not many. Ironically, I found out years later that some of my best friends in the fandom were actually there at that same convention. I just didn't know them yet. But anyway, yeah, I had fun at that convention too. This was when I was still getting into the Star Trek Twitter. I had a couple hundred followers. We talked about Star Trek, but it wasn't, it wasn't huge yet. So I didn't know lots of people. And looking back, it was that convention, and then the next year I went to Farpoint in Baltimore, which is a convention done in February. And I didn't know too many people there, but I had fun. And then after that, I have been to many conventions since then. I have never been to one where I didn't know people. Because at that point, after that, every convention I have been to since then, people have walked up to me and been like, "Are you Thad?" And it's the weirdest freaking thing. I don't consider myself a Twitter celebrity. I only have 3,000 followers, which is not, by Twitter celebrity standards, is not many. But the Star Trek Twitter community is so like involved with each other and so close knit that like every convention I go to, I meet people that I already knew on the internet, and it's amazing.
Well, I think that the Star Trek Twitter community, if I can bring in a little bit of my workplace sensibility here, probably follows the Pareto principle, like the 80-20 rule, which is there's probably 20% of the people who are in the Star Trek Twitter audience are making 80% of the content. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's people who are posting all the time and like interacting all the time. Right. And they're, you know, people like you know, people like me to a lesser degree and a lot of other people that we mutually know who are generating a lot of the content. But there's a lot of people out there who barely post. Right. Who, you know, very rarely will say anything. And I think that's actually the majority of the audience. So in a case like that, it's probably fairly simple to get well known if you're posting a lot, because there's just not that many people who are posting compared to those who are reading. So it's really weird. And I mean, maybe you've had this experience as a podcaster where I certainly have, where people come up to you and they act like they know you. And you're like, do I know you? And
yep,
because
this happens.
Yeah, you're in their ear holes all the time. You know, they feel like they know you, but you have no idea who they are. They're like, I listen to your show, and you're like, oh, that's great. But you have no idea who they are, but they have learned a lot about you. It's a very strange and sort of humbling experience in a way. Mm-hmm. So you've had the Twitter fans out there going up to you at the conventions. And I imagine, because this is a story I hear often on Trek Profiles, so I want to hear you respond to it, which is that, you know, you go to that first STLV or that first really big Star Trek convention and you think, well, that'll be something I'll do once and that'll be great. And then you're like, okay, now I got to come back every time.
That was the plan. I was only going to do it once because it's expensive.
Yeah,
I mean, I spent much less money the next year because the first year I got copper seats and pretty much immediately realized that was completely unnecessary. Because you can see, well, actually, there are general admission seats that are farther forward than some of the copper seats, and you can see everything anyway. But yes, no, I was only going to go once, but after I went that one year, I'm like, oh, I got to go back. So I have been back twice since. I would have gone this year if it had happened. Mm-hmm. And in 2018, that was the year that like it was just like Nirvana, basically. It was amazing because at that point I knew people that I had met from other conventions. I knew a lot of people that I knew pretty well from Twitter that like I got to meet and hang out with, including you.
That's right, we hung out.
Yeah, I remember you came up to me and were like, "Hey, Thad." But I knew who you were, so it was okay.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and that was the year where I really felt like where like going to SDLV kind of feels like coming home and like spending just an entire week just celebrating with friends and just having an amazing time. And then 2019
the tribe gathers, right? Yeah, mm-hmm. The tribe gathers, right? And it's these people that you know about or people that you interact with occasionally via social media, but when the whole tribe gets together, it's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, and if I can for just a second like just be a little sad,
sure,
we're never going to have exactly that same thing again. There will still, because Creation no longer has the official license, there is going to be a different official Star Trek convention. Creation is still going to do their Las Vegas convention. There will still be a lot of people that go to it. Not everyone will go, and it won't feel the same.
It's fair. I think it's a thing where we just have to see, you know, we just have to see how it is.
I'm not saying it won't still be fun,
yeah,
but I don't think it'll be the same. See, I don't think it'll change directly, but I think what will happen is not as many people are going to be going. There will be some people who can't do two conventions and will choose the official convention over Creations.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not even sure if I can do both. It all depends on where and when the official one will end up being. Especially because, at least for 2022, I'm locked in for the Star Trek cruise, so...
I'll see you there. I'll see you there. I'm paid in full, baby.
Yeah,
it's
me
going
too.
to be a thing.
I've been paid in full since it was going to be the 2021 cruise.
Me too. As soon as it went on sale, I remembered how fast it had sold out the previous years, and so
yeah, this was the one year you could still wait. You could still buy tickets.
Yeah. But I when it went on sale in March, as soon as the older cruise shut down and they opened it up, I was like, that day, me and my friend here in town, we put our money down and we were in it.
Because of that, though, it's not going to be there will certainly be familiar faces, but there will be people that we are used to seeing who won't be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's gonna change things. I'm also not sure if the one that's supposed to happen next year, we'll see, is gonna be 5 days like it has been. I'm not sure if they'll be able to keep that momentum going either. It would not surprise me if it goes down to a more traditional sort of 3-day convention after that.
We shall see. We're recording this in the fall of 2020, so a lot of that hasn't been figured out yet. So we'll have to see what it looks like.
Yeah, we'll see if we even are doing conventions next year.
Exactly. So a couple of other bits and bobs I want to ask you about that, which is that the people won't know this because it was before we started recording, but I'm actually wearing the shirt from your Star Trek podcast, Delta Flyer. So what induced you to start podcasting about Star Trek? When did you decide to launch a Star Trek podcast? And why did you choose to make a Voyager-specific podcast?
Okay. So one of my best friends, Stuart, and I have, we like to spend time together, being good friends.
One would hope.
And he had moved from Pennsylvania to Georgia, and we wanted to, still talk every week and hang out. So he had the idea. We both really enjoy. So this isn't Delta Flyer yet, actually. We started with Stargate Weekly, which is the same thing, but for Stargate SG-1. Basically, we watched an episode of Stargate every week and talked about it. Mm-hmm. And he had the idea that, we like to talk about sci-fi together anyway. Why don't we do this and do a podcast? So, okay. So we did that. We got a couple listeners, I think like 100 or so eventually. And, really we were just enjoying hanging out together.
Sure.
But like almost every episode we would make a reference to Star Trek. And we would keep saying, but this isn't a Star Trek podcast. So at some point I turned to him, I'm like, we could do a Star Trek podcast. So the reason we did Stargate is because we both are big Stargate fans, and we had also watched we had known each other in high school, but we had really become friends after that. Because there was a period of time where he and I were the only people that we knew from high school that were still in our hometown, that we actually wanted to hang out with. Obviously there were other people, but of our friend group, right, that were still. So we were hanging out a lot. And so we watched Stargate a lot together. We also watched Star Trek Voyager a lot together because I had a collection of VHS tapes that I had painstakingly recorded every single episode. And so we're like, okay, so let's do Voyager. So we started doing Voyager. We have actually been on hiatus for quite a bit due to some scheduling issues, real life issues, etc. We do plan to come back at some point, but yeah,
because that was my next question. I want to know the status of the apparatus, my man.
We're still talking about it. We have not. Neither of us is willing to say no. We're done. We do want to continue. It's just the logistics is complicated. But we are planning to come back. Also, Robert Duncan McNeil and Garrett Wong basically stole our name. So,
well, they are the Delta Flyers.
Yes,
plural. Right? Whereas you are the Delta Flyer or Delta Flyer.
Yes, and if I had a nickel for every single message that our social media team has gotten that was meant for them, I would have a lot of nickels. And I say our social media team, I really just mean me.
I wouldn't have mentioned that. I thought it would be great, to see you at the top of Delta Flyer Tower there in Harrisburg, with scores of minions, handling the social medias and the audio production. It would have been a glorious thing to imagine.
Yeah, on a fun. What really gets it complicated is our banner picture on both our Twitter and Facebook page, and we still have it that way because it's awesome, is from when Stuart and I were at TrekLanta, a small Star Trek convention in Atlanta, and we met Robert Duncan McNeil and got a photo with him. So people go to that page and they see a photo of Robbie McNeil, and they're like, oh, well, this must be that podcast. But we came first. Also, I did actually, because I'm in a group of people that were on this year's Star Trek cruise that get together in a Zoom meeting regularly, and Garrett Wong is sometimes part of that, and he actually did apologize to me for that because they didn't actually look to see if there was another podcast with a similar name before they published. He said, like, when they first released on iTunes, he was searching to see if it was uploaded yet, and he saw us. He's like, uh-oh. But it was too late at that point. They had already, done all the publicity for it, and so yeah. That's
it. There's a little tip for anybody who's out there wanting to start a podcast. Always search for the name, search to see if you can get the web address, the URL, search for the social media tags, search for all that stuff.
Similar names as well, just to make sure there isn't some huge podcast with a similar name.
There you go.
We are not huge. That didn't count in this case. But no, now the problem is when we do come back, it's trying to promote it because people will just be going to the other one.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Well, you know what, though? The one thing I always say about podcasting in general is that it's a very fat tail, and there is really room to let 1,000 flowers bloom. So
absolutely.
If you want, Star Trek podcasts about slash fic set in the Berman era, I'm sure there's like a bunch of podcasts for that. If you want rewatch podcasts, focusing on Voyager, there's a bunch about that, including some very good ones, at Delta Flyer. And if you want, podcasts where actors are talking about the shows that they were on, there's ones for that. So I think it's one of the great things that the internet's really enabled. Yeah. Okay. The M5 wants me to ask you a particular question about seeing First Contact as a kid. So tell me what's going on here and what information has the M5 discovered?
Oh, it's just, it was a very important experience for me because it was the first time I saw a Star Trek movie in the theater. 96 was sort of peak fandom for me as a little kid. I mean, that was basically Star Trek at its peak in the 90s, too. I mean, because at that point we had DS9 and Voyager were both on, and they were both good at that point, too. I mean, I would say that they were always good, but, some people would disagree with that. And we had the Star Trek movies. Star Trek First Contact was a huge blockbuster. It was a hit. It was a great movie. My older sister took me to see it because I was 10 years old and it was a PG-13 movie. She had... So we actually saw it a few weeks after it premiered because we had to wait for her to be old enough to take me to see a PG-13 movie.
I deem her the Star Trek enabler.
Oh, yeah. But this is the same sister who introduced me to Star Trek. Yeah, she took me to see that. I absolutely loved it. It was an amazing experience. I mean, it's just, I would say that was like a formative experience in my Star Trek fandom was seeing First Contact in the theater, because that was the first movie that, like, Generations had come out when I was a Star Trek fan when Generations came out, but it, like, wasn't, like, on my radar. Like, I didn't really know that much about Generations until after it was already... So, like, the first time I saw Generations, we rented it from Blockbuster. I mean, but First Contact, I was excited. I'm like, I'm going to go see this. This is Star Trek. It's new. It's going to be exciting. And it was everything I hoped for.
I remember to go see, I want to say, Star Trek Beyond at the movie theater by myself in a Star Trek uniform. And I was like, nice. I was like, this is something I would have never done, like, years earlier, right? But I was like, the hell with it. I'm like 45 years old. This is who I am. This is what I do. Here's how, And I remember the guy taking my ticket. He was like, all right, yeah, cause, I was getting nothing but love. So I just thought that was the best thing. So going to those movies can be a great experience. I hope we get to do it again at some point.
Yes. Someday.
Thad, the M5 is telling me that we should talk about some episodes. Are you game?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go ahead and start with the Drumhead, TNG Season 4, Episode 21. This, of course, is the one where we have crewman Tarsus, who is under the gun and being investigated by Admiral Satie, and we have the famous Picard speech, links in the chain, and all of that. What in particular about this episode draws you to it, Thad?
So I would argue that this episode is Star Trek's finest hour. It is... Whenever someone asks me what my favorite Star Trek episode is, this is the one I point to. First off, I will say that Jean-Luc Picard is an amazing character. I have basically looked up to him as a hero since I was a kid. Because, yeah. And I would say that specifically, there is nothing better with Picard than when he is righteously angry and lecturing people on an ethical or moral issue. It is just fantastic. Anytime it happens, it's just perfect. I know when I started, brief tangent, of course, but when I watched the premiere of Star Trek Picard, the first episode, when he starts doing that when he started lecturing that reporter about how Romulan lives are worth just as much as anyone else's lives, and it's like, this is perfect. This is Picard again. And that's... The Drumhead is the quintessential example of that. That speech that Picard gives, where he's talking about the first speech censored, chains us all irrevocably. That is absolutely... It is a message that is always relevant and is just very important. And Star Trek is at its best when it is telling us an important lesson on the human condition, and that there are very few more important lessons than what the Drumhead says.
It's interesting that this episode's on the list, that because I'm also a big fan of the episode, and in my personal life, I'm very much of a civil libertarian, and I support a lot of the freedoms that entails, and it seems interesting to me that there's like this censoriousness that's sort of in the ether today, right? That people are very eager to talk about what cannot be said, right? And to look for examples of that. And I'm a believer that discourse is the way, right? We talk about things and we get to the truth by talking about it. And I think that this episode is really eternal in that way, right? And it's something that you could watch today and the message is just as powerful. One of the things, though, that I think is interesting about the episode, and it's something that I sort of always knew, but on the latest rewatch of this, it's something that jumped out at me, which is that, of course, Simon Tarsus is, in fact, a liar.
Yes, but not about anything
Not about that.
Bad.
Not about that. But he did falsify his admission records into Starfleet,
and
right?
He should certainly face some sort of censure for that. But he did not sabotage the Enterprise. Correct.
He did not do the really bad thing, right? But he did do something that could get you in a heck of a lot of trouble. And again, right. This is what... Go ahead.
Yeah, and that bugs me because I would like to think, at least, that Starfleet would have been like, yeah, it's fine that you're part Romulan. You can still be in Starfleet. Like, I can't imagine they would say no to that. It just doesn't seem like what the Federation is all about. That why would they say that if someone is part Romulan, they can't be part of... Yeah, anyway.
Well, this is one of these issues where my own real life sort of intersects with the show and my own background sort of comes into it. So let me tell you why I think this always jumps out at me is because I'm a veteran, as I've talked about on the show. And when you join the military, you got to fill out like a phone book's worth of data, right? I mean, just every place you've been, all your biographical data, you got to fill it out and, all this. And they always ask like these certain questions like, do you sanction overthrowing the government, and all this other kinds of stuff, right? You fill out all this stuff, and then if you're going to have a security clearance, there's even more stuff, right? So you fill all this out. Eventually, at some point, you go to boot camp, and in boot camp, they pull you into a meeting, which in the Navy at the time, they called MOT, and it was called Moment of Truth. And that's actually what it was called. That's not the slang term. It was actually the name of the meeting. And they bring you in a room with a guy who's got your file sitting in front of him, and he's got all the paperwork laid out. And he says, this is your very last chance to tell me anything that you did not earlier disclose. If you want to revise any paperwork, if you want to tell me that anything in here is incorrect, you can tell me and you get a free pass. Like, you could have 20 felonies right now and tell me, and we're not going to prosecute you. The worst thing that will happen is that we'll send you home. That's the worst possible thing, and you have, and it's a known thing, but they say, but we find out anything after this point, after you pass MOT, then we can prosecute you. Then we can throw you in the brig. We can give you the dishonorable discharge or the big chicken dinner, which is called the bad conduct discharge. I mean, we can do whatever we want, but you can say this is your very last chance. And like, you have to sign a document, And so that moment, you're a young kid, and you're sitting there and there's this guy, he's got all this documents. And so that always comes up to me whenever I watch the episode and I think, oh, he didn't do MOT. You got to do the MOT, Simon Tarsus. Anyway, a fantastic episode. Sorry for the little diversion, but we often do that here on Trek Profiles. So I have to ask you about Pathfinder, Voyager Season 5, Episode 10. Here we have a Lieutenant Barclay episode. A lot going on in this episode where he's trying to contact the Voyager. He has this idea about a way to communicate with them. He gets shot down by his boss. And eventually he gets some help from Counselor Troy. And he actually is able to go ahead and do this. And there's always a little bit of holodeck stuff going on with Barclay as well. Why is this one of your favorite and/or best episodes of Star Trek, then?
Well, first off, I will say that we see a recurring theme here between Drumhead and Pathfinder, in which we have a character that is in fact doing something that they shouldn't be doing, because Barclay absolutely should be punished for what he does in Pathfinder, even though it ended up working out perfectly the way it should have. But beyond that, this one. Drumhead for me, Drumhead was Star Trek at its best. It's absolutely the message, etc. Pathfinder is much more personal for me.
Okay, tell me.
So, I'm on the autistic spectrum, and growing up as a kid, I was different. I did not have many friends. People saw me as, this awkward, weird kid that no one wanted to do anything with, and people wanted to make fun of, etc., etc. In Star Trek, I saw characters like Barclay, where he has many social issues. He's not able to integrate with and I saw a lot of myself in him, and I saw a person that was accepted and was actually celebrated for what he could bring to the team, what he could do. And that made a very big impression on me as a kid. And Pathfinder in specific, I think it's the best Barclay episode. There are some that I don't like. There are most I do like, and I always enjoy the character. But Pathfinder, I feel like, is the best example of an episode about Reg Barclay. And in this episode, he is obsessed with an idea that probably, ends up working, but had a really good chance of not working. But beyond that, the fact he wouldn't give up on what he wanted to do, and that is a very, Barclay is never said to be an autistic character, and also in the 90s they probably wouldn't have done that, even known to say that anyway, because autism certainly was known. It wasn't what is often referred to as high functioning autism, people that with autism who are able to some extent integrate as society, sort of, and participate in society, was not really something that was part of the social discourse in the 90s. Autistic people, that's when it started to become a thing, basically. Autistic people were the people that, were locked away in their own minds and couldn't. But anyway, they never would have said that about Barclay. But he still appeared that way. And many people have since then speculated that Barkley is certainly not neurotypical, and his brain does not necessarily work the same way as other people's. And whether you want to say he's autistic, I think that's definitely true. And it's not true representation because he's never called out to be that, but to me, it feels that way. And so that character has always been very important to me. And that particular episode, just because of the way, even when he does something wrong, he's still supported. They still want to make sure that he's all right. Like everyone in that episode, even when they're angry at Barkley, and they have reason to be, is still caring about him. And you can tell that, like, his boss truly cares about him, wants him to be happy, wants what's best for him. Even Admiral Paris doesn't wants what's best for Barkley, and people are accepting of him, and it's just it's important. It has meant a lot to me ever since I was a kid.
So very fair. I'm interested that you brought up Commander Pete Harkins, because in my most recent rewatch to prepare for this, I have to say I went kind of back and forth on Harkins. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to like him, and then I ended up hating him when he was tapping Barkley on the head at one point in the episode. I thought, dude, don't do that. Like that is demeaning.
That was
That is not good. You know, like that really jumped out at me, and I was like, you're kind of a jerk, dude. But then later on, he's trying to set him up on a date with his wife's sister. I think, well, he can't hate the guy, you know? So I kind of had a back and forth with Harkins. I wasn't sure how I felt about him. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. So
also, Barkley has a cat named for a Star Trek character in that episode, too.
Oh, what is the name of the cat? I didn't make a note of that.
Neelix.
Oh, right. By the way, that cat was gigantic. Like, it was a gigantic... Yeah, it was a very fluffy cat. And his ridiculous giant apartment, which I just find that really amazing. Like, they have these gigantic apartments. It was really crazy. Marina and Dwight, though, were so good in the episode, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to divert for just a second, and I didn't prep this or even preview it with you, but I just wanted to ask, have you seen the Star Trek adjacent film, Please Stand By?
I have not. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay. I saw it, and I'm not that familiar with autism in general, so I don't know enough to speak about it, but it was certainly, I think, a very touching film and really well done. But I was curious if you'd seen it and what your opinion on it was. So I would recommend, do me a favor, if you ever get a chance to see it, please let me know what you think. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, great.
No, it definitely sounds interesting from what I read about it. I just haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Well, the main character is, I hesitate to use the words, but please correct me, Internet, if I'm wrong, but she is definitely not high functioning. She lives in a group home, and she has outbursts and tantrums and, you know, some problems that, like, her family, because they had smaller kids, they're like, we can't have her around when she has these tantrums because it could be a danger to the little kids. And she works in a Cinnabon, and she watches Star Trek, you know, and that's basically what it's about. And she's writing this script because they have a Star Trek script contest. That's the plot of the film. And she's trying to get the script to Paramount Studios by the deadline. And that's what the movie's about. And she decides that she has to physically take it down there on her own. And she basically leaves the group home, and no, she didn't tell anybody, and everyone's flipping out like, where did she go? And it's basically about her adventures in trying to get, that's what the movie is. But I thought it was a really well done film, but I don't know enough to speak about those particular issues, but I would always be interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, I will say that I'm not a huge fan of the term high functioning in general, because it implies, you know, worth over less worth. But I will say that if she actually had if she, I mean, it's still used. I'm just saying that personally. There also isn't a better term that I've come across. But anyway, I will say that if she was able to hold down a job, then she would qualify as high functioning, even if she does have other issues.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, fair enough. Okay. let's talk about Measure of a Man. We're going to stay with, do another TNG episode. So this is season 2, episode 9. This is the famous episode where, of course, we put Data on trial. Really, is he a box on wheels that we can disassemble, or does he have sentience and should be treated as such? We have it. It's notable for many reasons. First of all, it was one of the very first episodes written by Melinda Snodgrass, her entry into writing for Star Trek. And of course, Gene hated the episode because it's part of Gene's vision that there are not lawyers in the future. So the whole concept of the episode didn't fly with him because he's like, there's no attorneys, which was very interesting. So tell me, what about this episode draws you to it, Thad?
Well, first off, I'm curious. Do you know how Gene felt about court-martial and TOS?
Well, yeah, right. There's a court-martial. There's it just, you can't ever look at Star Trek's vision of the future too closely. This is an argument I've actually had. Okay, we're going to go on a diversion right now. I'm sorry. We're going to come back to the episode, Thad, but we're going to dive into something else. Okay. And this is not something we prepared. But I've always felt that Star Trek is like a very loose development platform. It's really not, handed down on stone tablets. And I see people making assertions all the time about like the Federation is this or that or the other thing. And it's like, you cannot look at these things too closely because they make no freaking sense. Like, for example, we're told like, okay, it's a utopia. Okay. Some people say it's a socialist utopia. I don't even get that far. Like, the Federation's a utopia. Okay. Please explain to me why all these people feel compelled to leave Utopia and go be miners on Janus 6 in Devil in the Dark. Like, why would you leave Utopia to do that? Right? Like, that makes no sense to me. Right? So I just have a hard time with it. Or in particular, or for instance, in Deep Space Nine, why would anyone be driving around a freighter like Cassidy Yates? Like, what's the utopian aspect of that? I don't understand, or if why isn't everyone hanging out in New Orleans eating at Cisco's dad's restaurant, and how is he arbitrating who gets in the door? Like, how is all that happening? You can't look at these things too closely because the whole concept of the place kind of falls apart. Now, that's my rant. I'll stop there and let you react to it. Tell me if I'm off base or not. And I'm totally willing to be called out on it if I am.
No, you're not. I mean, is there money in Star Trek? It depends on who you ask.
And when you ask.
Yes. Yeah. So, no, there's all sorts of inconsistencies because, well, at the end of the day, it is a fictional television show. I think, and what really comes down to is hundreds of different writers have written for this show over, 60 years. So there's going to be all sorts of interesting inconsistencies.
Some shows, I think, have delivered this. They've delivered this kind of experience where they have like a solid world building. And I think that people are looking at Star Trek for that. And it's just, that's not what this show is, man. Like, I'm reminded of a guy who, there was a show on Amazon Prime called Carnival Row. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great show. I highly recommend it to anybody. Yeah. But the guy, that all came from the brain of one guy. Mm-hmm. And there's a character in the show, and as we sit here, I don't remember which character it is, who is described as a poet and has written, it was one of the Fae characters and has written Fae poetry, but like, we don't ever see her poems or hear her recite any of it, except for maybe a line or two here and there. The guy who wrote the show wrote a book of her poems.
Yeah.
Like, he has a book of her poetry that he wrote because, like, well, it helped me understand the character. It's like, dude, you don't need to do that. But he did. So, like, if you want that intricate world building, there are shows out there that promise that. And I think that people are just holding Star Trek to a standard that I don't think it ever promised. I think that's like a fan invention, I rant on this occasionally. I'm sorry, Thad. I apologize.
No, it's fine. One of my favorite contradictions is Starfleet is not a military organization, except for all those times that it fights the Federation's wars for them.
Yeah. Or they don't have money, except for the time that Kirk sold his house, and that other time where he actually asks Spock how much money Starfleet has invested in his education. It's all true.
If you don't need money, you don't need mine.
Well, there you go.
DS9 quote.
So let's bring it back. I'm sorry for our little diversion there, dear listeners. Thank you for your infinite patience, but that's what you've come to expect on Trek Profiles. So let's go back to Measure of a Man. We've talked about sort of the idea of the episode, but what about it is the core truth in the episode that appeals to you, Thad?
Well, much like Drumhead, Measure of a Man is Captain Picard arguing forcefully for what is right and doing an amazing job of it. Also, specifically, much like Barclay, I also strongly identified with Data as a child because he was someone who tried very much to integrate himself into social situations and didn't really know what to do. And I felt strongly, I had an affinity for him. And the core message of Measure of a Man is, if someone is different, does that give them the same rights as everyone else? And the answer should always be yes. And we, as a human society, don't always measure up to that. No pun intended. And much like the Drumhead, the lesson in Measure of a Man is timeless and incredibly important.
I just want to point out for listeners, we actually had a discussion about Measure of a Man versus author on the episode that I did with Kimberly Lawler, who's actually an attorney. So we actually had a discussion about sort of how the cases would actually proceed, and it's much more of a sort of a legalistic opinion on it. So if anybody's interested, you can go back and listen to that. But certainly as a piece of drama and as an episode of Star Trek, Measure of a Man is certainly a stellar episode. And, I think that's one of the things I think about, and again, we're going to divert for a second, but as I watch like modern Trek, one of the things I think about is which episodes of this show are they going to be talking about in 50 years? Because that's how I think about TOS and TNG. Like, here people still are talking about how great the Drumhead is and how great Measure of a Man is. And I look at the new show, and that's what I think about too, is like, are there going to be episodes that...
So I think that the next episode we're going to talk about will probably fit that bill.
Well, then let's do it. Let's talk about New Eden, Discovery, Season 2, Episode 2. Here we have Terralisium. Here we have Captain Pike going down to the planet. We have this weird polyglot religion that they sort of create down there. Tell me why this is such a special episode. And tell me, Thad, because you've laid down the marker, why are they going to be talking about this episode of Star Trek in 50 years?
Well... I don't know if they will for sure. I know. Just think
it's okay.
It probably has the hallmarks of it. So I have a complicated relationship with religion.
Okay.
I grew up in a very Christian home. I went to a Christian elementary school even. But from around the age of 6 or 7 until my early 20s, when I finally just completely went with it, I questioned pretty much everything. And like I felt bad about questioning, because I felt like, well, everyone else just believes this, why can't I? But eventually I just came to terms with it and said, okay, well, I just don't believe. And yeah, I've been much better personally, I've been much better since I've done that. But New Eden, obviously, the part of the message in New Eden is basically that religion can be important for and is useful for the people who do believe religion is very important. And I don't personally believe in anything religious at this point. I have a very, scientific, rational view of, I don't personally believe in the existence of a god or any higher power. For those who do, it's still important, even whether or not that actually exists doesn't really, it matters to them, but I don't think it matters in the grand scheme of things for someone's religion, whether or not it's real. What matters is how someone actually feels, and whether they find spiritual fulfillment in what they believe. And that's what really matters. And in New Eden, we get that. We have the people that want to believe in the Red Angel and want to believe in everything, and that's how and the Discovery crew lets them continue to have but at the same time, there's someone who doesn't believe that. There's someone who believes in the science and wants to know that, and they also show him that
Mm-hmm.
that what he, I mean, because he believes, at the end of the day, he believes just as strongly as the other people.
Sure.
And they also give him that validation and show him the actual scientific foundation for what he believes, and that it's true that they're, even if they're not able to explain everything with the Red Angel, they are able to show, and I don't remember the character's name, but the character that Pike talks to at the end of the episode, that he gives him the power to the battery to power the church, and tells him that yes, they are from a starship and technology, and that
Jacob.
Thank you. Yes. And the fact that because that's something that is very important to me, is that many people are very strongly of the opinion that their beliefs are the correct beliefs and other beliefs are wrong. And anyone who believes something other than I believe must be terrible, and I shouldn't give them the time of day because they don't believe the right thing. And it doesn't matter. None of it matters. They're all people. Everyone believes different things. What matters far more is that you accept that everyone else is important, and not that they believe in God or the boogeyman or whatever. And New Eden just really speaks to that sort of mentality to me.
Well, I got to tell you, those are pretty wise words, Thad, and I'd agree with you. And I wish people had sort of that feeling as we just got through with a presidential election here, and the idea that you don't have to believe the same thing I do, and you can be a good person and not believe the same thing I do. That seems like a novel concept to a lot of folks. I have to say, though, as I watch the episode, one line that always seizes up in my brain is when Michael Burnham says, "Science is my religion." Uh-huh. Because I find that very strange, because I'm a big fan of science. Science is great, but science tells you about the natural world. And there's lots of things that are beyond that. And so there has to be like a philosophy or something in addition to that. Because, like, for instance, what is beauty? What is truth? What is justice? How do I live my best life? Should I marry person A, or should I remain single? Or should I perhaps marry person B? There's all these things that we do in life that are sort of beyond the natural world in a way. And so you kind of need something. I'm not saying religion's the answer, but I'm saying there has to be some sort of philosophy or something beyond that, than just natural science, because science can get you lots of things, but I don't think it can get you all the way there to figuring out certain things about how to be in the world. And so you need something. What that something is can take a lot of different forms, and it certainly doesn't have to be a religion, but there has to be something, right, I think, as I think about it. So anyway, that's just my opinion, but people can beat me up on Twitter if they think I'm wrong. Okay, let's talk about a movie. Let's talk about Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. That this is probably held up as often one of the best of all the Star Trek films, arguably, depending on whose ranks you look at. Certainly in the top.
Number one for me.
So, okay, very good. What about it in particular appeals to you?
All right, so I've already talked about how Star Trek does a good job when it's, telling a message about humanity. And, well, there are fewer more thinly veiled allegories than Star Trek VI. Although I realize there are probably some people who watch it today who don't even get that anymore, because we're almost 30 years removed. But in 1991, it was quite obvious that Star Trek VI was an allegory for the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, mm-hmm, and the Soviet Union and all of its allies, and that was clear a representation of the end of the Cold War, and that's how the Federation was dealing with the Klingons. And it tells a very hopeful, very Star Trek message. We have what appeals to me so much on that is that, and I know Gene Roddenberry did get to see it before he died, but I don't know I'm not sure what he may or may not have thought about it. I imagine he probably wasn't a fan of the fact that Kirk was harboring racism.
Oh, sure.
To me, the fact that it shows the characters are flawed, but are willing to address those flaws and work to get past them and recognize that these are bad things that they have, but they're wrong, is very important. Because no one is perfect. Certainly not all the time. And we all have prejudices that, whether conscious or unconscious, that we need to confront. And the entire message of this movie is confronting those prejudices on both sides. The Klingons and the Federation, both sides have people that do not want to make peace, do not want to continue into the undiscovered country. And Kirk and all the rest of our heroes have to fight against that intolerance, and while realizing that they don't really want that either, but they recognize that it's what should be done, and they will fight for it. And it's a good allegory, and it's just a good story for the way humanity should be, that we should address these problems and work towards a better future.
Oh, I agree. It's a beautiful story, and there's certainly a lot about the Federation coming to terms with what it means to open your hand to your enemy. Mm-hmm. One of the critiques I've seen of the movie, though, is that the Klingons have no such reckoning. There's never a moment in the show where the Klingons are like, we did a bunch of mass murders and stuff. And like for instance, an Errand of Mercy, they were rounding up Organians in the street and just executing them 200 at a time. And there was a lot of bad stuff that the Klingons did, but there was never a reckoning for them. How would you respond to that?
Well, that's a tough question. And it's a hard question to answer. Well, specifically in the case of the Organians, it ended up being no harm, no foul. But there were plenty of other situations where, what they did to the Akamarians and the people of the planet from A Private Little War, whose name I can't remember.
Yep. No, I totally get it. Yeah, I mean, the Klingons done a lot of bad stuff. And so it does stick out at me when I look at it. But it's one of the things I still sort of wrestle with, is I felt like there was a missing scene somewhere in the movie. And again, I don't mean to rewrite it, but it's a reckoning I wanted to have. Sure.
And I can definitely understand that. But at the same time, that's also still, the allegory still fits for our world, because there are many atrocities that have happened over the years that have never been accounted for.
I've talked about that extensively on my own podcasting extravaganza episodes. In fact, I had a whole segment with it. With I think it was Amy Nelson. I had a discussion about that. So I'm right there with you, Thad. It's interesting because I want to draw a parallel, if I can bring in another episode that's on the list, because I think there's an interesting parallel here in a way. And that's The Way of the Warrior, Deep Space Nine, Season 4, Episodes 1 and 2. And which is a great double set of episodes. But one of the things that I think is interesting about the Worf character is that he's like a make-believe Klingon in a lot of ways. He's more Klingon than the Klingons, right? Because when you see the Klingons, I'm thinking of, oh gosh, I forget the character's name now, but Martok's son is in the episode, right? And he beats up Garrick by ambushing him in his clothing shop. He's when we really see the Klingons, especially in all the Duras episodes, they are not living up to the billing that Worf talks about, and I always say this, and I know people are going to be sick of me saying this, but the worst things the Klingons say about the Romulans are true about them. They're duplicitous. They're shifty, and all that.
The Romulans are at least honest about it.
Yeah, at least they don't, have false billing, right? So I always note that it's interesting that there's sort of this dichotomy that we have with the Klingons, that there's sort of this ideal that we have that's sort of wrapped up in the Worf character. And then there's how they actually are, and I always think of Kempek, as sort of the model of that. He's sort of like this crafty politician behind the scenes, but then he's out and he's the chancellor, but then he's like this crafty politician, right? The minute he's behind the throne. So, So we've got one way that we see them in sort of undiscovered country, and then we've got this other way that they are in the Way of the Warrior when we sort of get into seeing how they're actually being. And Gowron is sort of a crafty politician too in his way, although he doesn't do that so much publicly, I think. So I'm curious how you would reconcile these two views of the Klingons.
Oh, I think that's definitely true. I think Worf is very much the idealistic Klingon, and there's so many episodes where Worf comes up against Klingons and sees that they fall short of his ideals. Like, it happens over and over and over again. So, no, I think you're spot on with that.
And Ezri calls him on it in season 7, which I really loved. That's one of my favorite little bits, one of my favorite little Ezri bits. But let's, unless there's something else you want to say about Star Trek 6, I mean, let's talk about Way of the Warrior, actually. Sure. Let's dive into that. We've got the appearance of the bald Sisko, the intro of Martok. I mean, so much happens in these episodes, I'd almost forgotten about it. We've got the holographic Hubitian baths, and we've got Jadzia and Kira and holographic shenanigans. We've got a lot of Garrick stuff. We've got the famous root beer. The Federation is root beer talk is in this one. And also we have Worf ordering prune juice, which is a direct line that comes out of one of my favorite Star Trek novels, The Final Reflection, which I will endlessly talk about. So that whole idea that Klingons like fruit juice comes directly out of that book. So, and also we've got some Cassidy Yates stuff in here as well. So, this was a lot of action adventure, a lot of politics, but what's the message of this episode, Thad, that jumps out at you?
Ooh, I'm not sure it has a message. Like, certainly not in the same way that some of the other episodes we've talked about have like an obvious moral that the episode is trying to tell you. DS9 doesn't do that as much. There are certainly episodes where that happens, but DS9 is much more about telling this political narrative over the course of several years. And I'm not sure that... I don't know that we can find a real-life allegory to Way of the Warrior or a strong message that it's trying to tell you. There certainly are episodes of DS9 that do, on both fronts. But I don't know that this is one of them. What it is a fantastic episode. And I don't even think of it as 2 episodes because it actually originally aired as a 2-hour single block. I remember I definitely remember sitting down and watching it as a kid. And I have probably seen Way of the Warrior more than any other Star Trek episode over the years.
Really?
Like, frequently when I'm like, I want to watch some Star Trek, Way of the Warrior is what I turn to. Because it is... I'm not even sure season 4 is DS9's best season because there's so many great seasons in DS9. But season 4 is definitely DS9 in its stride. And Way of the Warrior started that off and exemplifies that. Because the studio wanted more action in DS9. They wanted to shake things up. So they brought in Worf, and they added the Klingon War. And while I think DS9 was just fine before, I think it really did. It had exactly the effect they intended. It did shake things up. It did make the show more interesting and more exciting. And just everything that happens in The Way of the Warrior from start to finish is just gripping and enthralling. And I will say the Federation root beer conversation is sort of an idealistic thing, so we do have a little bit of that.
I swear, when I see that root beer talk, you know what? I think about Takuvma. Honest to gosh, I do. I see Takuvma coming directly out of the root beer talk.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same message.
It sure is.
And also, one of my favorite things in that episode is just the silly moment when they're preparing for the Klingons to invade, and Quark is pulling out the box for his phaser.
Yes, his disruptor.
His Ferengi disruptor. I'm not sure if it's a phaser, but anyway, his gun. And Odo's there. He's talking to Odo. He opens it up, and there's an IOU from Rom saying that he used the parts from the disruptor to repair, I think it was the replicator.
Yes, it was the replicator, yeah.
And Quark is like, I'll kill him. And then Odo just says, With what?
You can't have enough Odo Quark moments in an episode, right? I mean, however many they give you, you always want more.
And this episode has all of the great characters for DS9 that we know so far. Because obviously Jeffrey Combs as Wayoon isn't in it because we haven't met his character yet. But we have Mark Alimo as Dukat. We have Garrick. We have Andy Robinson as Garrick. Both back, both having nice chemistry with each other because they both are there defending the station together against the Klingons. It's just everything about it is just and as you said, it's the first Bald Cisco episode, and I think we can all agree that Bald Cisco is the best Cisco.
Bald Cisco is best Cisco. I agree. That's totally right. We should make a hashtag for that. So it sounds like this is really just an episode that has just a lot of the right things for you in it as far as what you look for in a Star Trek episode. Totally fair. Totally fair. All right. Let's do one more. Let's do a Picard episode. Let's do Nepenthe, Season 1, Episode 7. It's interesting that in Star Trek sometimes you get these episodes that people really love that just don't have a lot to do with spaceships, space battles, weird, crazy aliens, and I think about episodes like Family. I think about episodes like Nepenthe. So what is it about this particular episode that draws you to it, Thad?
Well, from the superficial, they say my name in a Star Trek episode.
They do.
So, yeah. But this episode, in and of itself, in the same way that it was for the character of Picard, it's like a warm, fuzzy blanket. He goes to this planet because he knows he'll be safe here. He knows that the Rikers will be there to help him. And they are. And for us, as the viewer, seeing Riker and Troy there on screen for the first time since Nemesis is, well, okay, technically not, but we don't talk about that.
Right. So that which shall not be named.
And it was very comforting. Just the fact that they're there to support Picard in his endeavor, and Troy even does the counseling and tells him what he needs to hear, what he didn't know he needed to hear. And it's a very comforting episode in a season of Star Trek that isn't very comforting. I enjoy Picard. I really do. But for a lot of it, it's very bleak.
Yeah. And
Nepenthe isn't. Obviously, you have the story of Thad Riker, and that's very sad. The whole thing, especially the fact that the only reason he died was because of the ban on the AI, which I feel like shouldn't have. There should have been something they could have done. But beyond that, even with the grief that Will and Deanna have, you can also see that they are also genuinely pleased to have Picard there. And he absolutely needed to see those friendly faces at that moment. And it's just a very touching, very comforting episode.
Yeah, one of the things I really liked about it is just the idea that there's actually life after Starfleet for people.
Yes.
Which, it seems like in a lot of Star Trek, it's like, okay, if you're not in Starfleet Academy or in Starfleet, you're nobody, in a lot of ways, going right back to the original show, there's sort of that very Starfleet heavy focus on things. And I just really enjoyed the idea that someone actually got out and was having like a life and doing other things. I really, really like that part. And to actually see it like in a real way and experience it. We got a little bit of that of for example, like Data and All Good Things, but it was really about these other scenes. It was really about the other story, but this was like you really got to be in it and inhabit it. And they had built a life for themselves, which was glorious. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the reference to the Kazinti, by the way, which is an animated series reference, which just tickled me to no end. Okay, very good. Well, Dad, we've talked about the fact that you've been a Star Trek fan since you were 7 years old. Mm-hmm. You've spent a considerable amount of your quatloos on action figures, costumes, other sort of Star Trek related things. You are a Star Trek podcaster. You're spending 2 hours talking to some other weirdo about Star Trek online on another Star Trek podcast. It seems to me that Star Trek's a pretty big part of your life. Why is it so? Why is this?
I mean, we've certainly touched on a lot of that already. Is from when I was a kid, Star Trek showed me a future where people like me could be accepted and be welcome, and has continued to do so, and is at its heart, Star Trek is optimistic about humanity's future. And there is, especially these days, nothing that we need more than hope in the future. And that's what Star Trek will always be there for. And it will always be an important tool to tell us about the human condition, as I've said. And beyond that, just, I will say that the biggest part today for me about Star Trek is not everything else. It's not even watching Star Trek. It's not the things that I have, all the Star Trek things that I have, and I have oh so many. It's, in the last few years, it's all of the people that I have come to know through this fandom is probably even more important to me than anything about Star Trek itself. I have made some of my best friends in Star Trek fandom. And that is always, is a huge thing in my life.
Well, Thad, I have to tell you that I've enjoyed talking to you, but the M5 is signaling me that it is now time for the Kobayashi Maru. The Kobayashi Maru is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our little show. Are you ready, Thad?
I am.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulation and prepare to record Thad's responses.
Simulation ready.
Which Starfleet yards would you rather visit, Utopia Planitia or San Francisco Fleet?
Utopia Planitia.
Neelix has dessert for you. Take your pick, Jabalian Fudge Cake or Sweet Leola Root Tart.
Jabalian Fudge Cake.
Battle of the Captains. Take a lesson in archaeology from Picard or a cooking lesson from Captain Sisko.
Archaeology with Picard.
Time for a vacation. Take your pick from either of these two planets, Sigma Draconis or Barzan 2.
Sigma Draconis.
And finally, just for you, Thad, which is worse, misaligned rank pips or incorrect Delta badge placement?
Misaligned rank pips.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if our guest has passed the Kobayashi Maru.
Results displayed.
Okay, so I don't actually know what Sigma Draconis is, but I was assuming I wouldn't need a breathing apparatus like I would on Barzan 2.
Sigma Draconis, it actually was mentioned, I think, in one of the most recent Discovery episodes as we record this. It was actually in the background. That's the planet with Morg and Imorg and the Givers of Pain and Delight from TOS.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's actually that planet. Yeah. But, it's like I said, the questions don't matter, man.
I was thinking I didn't want to have to put the thing on my mouth for Barzan 2.
That's right, because it's not a place where we can breathe, but
right.
Sigma Draconis does not look that glorious. It doesn't look like the place where you'd want to hang out. It looks kind of terrible. Plus, there's the underground stuff, and I don't know. It's just very weird. It's just very weird. Okay, Thad, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Thad is awarded the title of Chief Operations Officer at Space Dock Command.
So there you go.
Awesome.
Thad, please tell people how they can get in touch with you if they wish to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Best place to find me is on Twitter, where I am at Tyrannicus. That's Tyranicus.
Thad, thank you so much for being part of Trek Profiles.
Absolutely.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. And before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your lingua code friendship messages, your phaser bolts of forceful feedback, or photos of your homemade shrine to Elam Garrick to feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us, it may be used in the show, or it may be flung randomly through the Atavachron to be lost in Sarpedon history. Some portions of the Kobayashi Maru questions in this very episode were submitted by listeners like you. In this particular case, listener Corby Hill submitted questions. You can find him on the Twitter @RightBirdFlies, and we thank him for his great submissions. You too can send in questions for the Kobayashi Maru, so check TrekProfiles.com for details and instructions. This time, I leave you with a quote from the episode Nepenthe, where Kestra says, quote, "It seems weird to me to make an android with mucus and saliva, but I guess Data would like that." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
Which is great. I appreciate that. Because otherwise it assigns you a fake name, and sometimes they're quite fanciful. So, well, because that's what it's going to name your. That's what it's going to name your audio file. So sometimes I end up with these audio file names that are like Exploding Weasel 007, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And also, I should say that it is also possible that the episodes will never be released, which has also happened from time to time. But I don't think that'll happen here. But hey, just putting it out there. I never pre-announce guests.
Those must have been some interesting recordings.
Thad, what can I say? I even put it in the bonus material for one of the other episodes. That, by the way, I'm like sitting on these episodes which will never come out, and it's because I just have no interest in being controversial. I just don't.
Right.
Like we went through this whole election season, and I didn't say a single thing about the election, really, except for like in the most anodyne way possible. Like, I'm sick of it,
I definitely thought about that, and I appreciate that you still follow me on Twitter, because I remember a couple years ago, you said that you unfollowed people who get political.
No, I don't. No. I didn't say that. That's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
What I do is if someone follows me and I look and like all their tweets are just political tweets, I'm like, I have no interest in this.
I got it. Okay.
Right. Because it's just not interesting to me. Right. Like, that is a Star Trek podcast account. I'm going to be talking about Star Trek. And so I try to curate the feed so that when I look at it, it's just Star Trek. I mean, I follow all kinds of other stuff on my other Twitter account, which I don't tweet at much. I don't tweet out of. I just follow a bunch of people there. Yeah. But that's where I follow anything I feel like, and I want to see what all different kinds of people are saying. But if like people are following me for Star Trek, which is fine, and their stuff is all political, I'm not going to follow back, because it's just, I just don't want it, Right. So if there has to be some Star Trek stuff there for me to follow.
Well, there will always be Star Trek stuff on my account.
Well, exactly. And I think that's great, man. So, yeah, of course, I have no problem with that. And I have no problem with people expressing their political views either. It's just if that's all you're going to tweet, then it's just not interesting.
Yeah.
For me.
I get it. And I wasn't planning on going that route with anything tonight, unless you had asked something like that, and I wasn't expecting you to ask anything like that. So
I might, and you're free to talk about whatever you want to talk about, man. Because the thing about the show, the way I do it, is that
I mean, I would say for me personally, like my Star Trek, entire identity, as it were, like I would say it informs my political view, but it's not like directly. There's no direct corollary, I guess.
Okay, well, that's up to you. If it comes up in the discussion and you want to talk about it, you're allowed to talk about it. Okay. You're allowed to go as far afield as you want. And I know you've listened to at least an episode or two, so you know that we often have diversions that go off in a crazy land.
I have not listened to every episode, but I have listened to most episodes.
Well, I know you've listened to at least one, so I know that. So
plenty more than one.
And we go off into, crazy land sometimes, and that's okay. I don't mind that. Because this is, really your showcase as far as Star Trek, right? This is your Star Trek story, right? And so if you want to talk about stuff, you can talk about stuff. It's fine. I try not to get into my stuff too much because I'm less interesting than it's about the guest. I feel that it's rude for me.
Plus, you've already had your episode.
Yeah, so if people are interested, they can go back to that. I did 3 of them, and it's like
I know
10 hours of content.
I know. I listened to all of them.
Oh, dude, no, no one should listen to that. I still think I should go back and do another pass on editing those, or at least cut that first one in half, because I was like, should I really release a 5-hour episode? Yes. So I don't know what came over me, but I decided to. So
I apologize in advance. It is raining like cats and dogs today, so every 15-20 minutes my sump pump will go off, and it will probably get caught in the microwave. Or microphone, not microwave.
Oh dear, if it gets in the microwave, Thad, we're gonna have real big problems here, bro. Sure. We very quickly go to question 1, which is always, are you a Star Trek fan? And you must confess, and if you cannot confess, we will go no further. Okay.
Yeah,
and then
I've been living a lie all this time. I'm not really.
I'm just fronting, bro.
Yeah.
I'm a Star Wars fan doing deep recon. So, all right. So when it comes to the topic of strange stuff in bathrooms, this is not a Star Trek thing, but I just got to share this. It's just totally weird. So my wife was on a business trip, and it was this very sort of trendy LA hotel. And she FaceTimes me at night like we always do when we're on business trips and not near each other. And she says, honey, there's a giant foot in the bathroom. And I said, what? She says, there's a gigantic 6-foot giant foot in the middle of the bathroom.
That's weird.
So if you want to do this,
weirder than Chakotay.
Let's do this right now. Go to Google and type in Standard Hotel Los Angeles foot. Standard Hotel Los Angeles foot. I almost guarantee it'll come up in the images. It's a giant black foot that's 6 feet long, sitting in the middle of the bathroom on the floor. It's bizarre.
Is it in every bathroom?
No. Every room is different. So there's only one room that has the foot. Maybe another room has a torso. Maybe another bathroom has a leg.
Yep,
I don't know.
That's a giant foot.
You found the picture, right?
Okay, so I really am concerned for humanity at the moment, because one of the top articles is a picture of that foot, and the article is called 20 Sexy Hotels to Have Sex in This Year. And I'm just who is that putting it in the mood?
Oh, honey, let's go look at the foot. It's just so weird. I don't know. But she had to show me the picture of this thing, and I was like, all right, that is definitely the weirdest thing I have seen in a bathroom.
That is way weirder than Chakotay.
Chakotay would not freak me out. Especially Judgy Chakotay, who's doing a PSA to remind people to wash their hands.
Judgy
That's
Chakotay
great.
would judge the heck out of that foot.
He would definitely be reporting that to the captain, who would be sipping her coffee and be like, what is this all about? So, okay.